Hi, good afternoon, everybody. A very warm welcome to you all for today's webinar entitled Embracing the Bike, Building a Greener and Healthier Recovery for London. My name is Ashok Sinha. I'm the Chief Executive of the London Cycling Campaign, and I have the very easy task today of simply ushering you through this afternoon's program. And I'd like to thank you all again for joining us for what I think will be a very rewarding and very interesting set of conversations that we're going to have today. And I think these are going to be the beginnings of a conversation. I hope they will spark lots of further discussions after the webinar itself. Now, I should, before I go on, thank many people who have been involved in putting this webinar together. I'd firstly like to thank my colleagues at the London Cycling Campaign. I'd also like to thank colleagues at the Embassy of the Netherlands and the Dutch Cycling Embassy and Vivian and Boss, who have contributed both in advance of this webinar in the preparation and are on the agenda today. So thank you to you all. Now, I think this is a really important time. It's always an important and a good time to talk about cycling, but it's a particularly important time for us to be having this conversation. And I'm particularly pleased that we're having it with our friends from the Netherlands. 8 years ago, the London Cycling Campaign ran a campaign called Love London Go Dutch, which, if I may be so bold, was absolutely instrumental in changing the landscape, the political landscape for cycling in London. We persuaded the then Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, to ditch the blue paint approach, the laissez-faire approach to making cycling safer, and adopt Dutch-style interventions from segregated cycle lanes to low traffic neighbourhoods. And that has been amazingly successful. Shortly after that campaign, we saw the announcement of a £100 million Mini Holland programme that was named after the campaign itself. And since then, the now Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has rolled that approach out, or is rolling that approach out to the rest of the United Kingdom, including another 30, I believe, Mini Hollands. And our current mayor, Sadiq Khan, we persuaded him to triple the amount of protected space in London, building on the previous successes, which, to his very great credit, and to Will Norman's very great credit, he did. And since then, and we'll hear from Will in a second, we have seen a rollout of protected space, temporary protected space in London to help deal with the problems that are being presented to London, particularly social distancing on public transport, protected space for cycling, to the extent that we now have 5 times, I think, the total amount of protected space for cycling that we had at the beginning of Sadiq Khan's term of office, which is a magnificent achievement. But there is still so much more to be done. We have to recover. London has to recover in a green and fair way from the recession that we are experiencing. And looking slightly further ahead, we in the London Cycling Campaign have put on pause, but we will relaunch our mayor election campaign entitled Climate Safe Streets, which is making the case for and demanding decarbonisation of London's roads by 2030, so that we in London can play our part in addressing the twin existential threats of the climate and ecological emergencies. So there is a lot at stake here, and we have to get it right. We have to accelerate, deepen and broaden that mass mode shift, walking, cycling, public transport, shared mobility, and so far as today's conversation is concerned, towards cycling, so that everybody, whatever their age and ability, can cycle for their everyday journeys safely and enjoyably. So that's what we're talking about today. In a moment, I'm going to introduce Will Norman, who's going to give a presentation and then take some questions about the fantastic work that he and his colleagues at TfL are doing in relation to the Mayor's Street Space Plan. But before that, I'm thrilled to be able to introduce Tessel van Essen, who's going to say a few words on behalf of the Embassy of the Netherlands. Tessel was there at the very beginning with Love London Go Dutch. She helped give us the support that we needed to run that campaign successfully, and we've been working together ever since. The Embassy and Tessel have been good friends to cycling and LCC, and I'm really pleased that you're here with us today. Tessel, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Tessel van Essen. I work as commercial attaché at the Dutch Embassy, and I'm very pleased to do this to continue this cooperation with the London Cycling Campaign, as we've done indeed over the past 8 years. As you probably know, cycling is a second nature to us Dutch, and we grow up with it. I grew up with it. I continue that with my children here, and literally Children take their bikes to school, visit their friends, go to sports club. Their parents cycle to work, to the groceries, to attend meetings in the evening, and even their grandparents cycle. And since the introduction of e-bikes, which sales have outnumbered normal bike sales for a number of years in the Netherlands, cycling has become even more popular, both with elderly people and for longer commutes. Cycling wasn't always as integrated in Dutch life as it is today. We took 40 years to get where we are to now. But it obviously required a lot of local, regional and national government input and to create safe and easy cycling nation with the infrastructure to go with it. We continue investing in our cycling. We have a national policy to do so, but very much a regional policies to do so and to get our numbers up even higher. And we have very much enjoyed, I have very much enjoyed seeing the numbers of people getting on their bikes in London in the last half year. As dramatic as the year may have been, this was a very positive outcome, I should say. And it would be wonderful if you could keep that increase going. And today's conference has been initiated by us to give you a helping hand through interactive workshops to make your city even more cycle-friendly. And for all ages and for Londoners of all ages and all backgrounds. And should you wish more tailored expertise after the workshops following today, feel free to make an appointment with any of the experts in the networking afterwards. Don't forget. And if not, I'm very happy to help you and liaise you with the right experts after the event in the weeks and months to come. Thank you very much to London Cycling Campaign again, to Will Norman and to the Dutch Cycling Embassy and Winfried and Bos for providing their experts, and of course to all UK experts who are in this call. Thank you very much and have a wonderful conference. I hope it's useful to you.
Thank you so much, Tessel, and thank you again for all the support you've given us over the years. Right, let's get on to Will Norman in a second. Just time for me to run through the agenda. So Will is going to speak for a short period of time and then take some questions, and I believe Will has to go after that. At about 4:30 we're going to move into workshops, which will run until 15:40, 3:40, at which point we'll have a half-an-hour wrap-up session, so report back from the workshops and any discussion that arises from those report backs. I'll then conclude at about conclude the formal part of the webinar at 4:20. After which there'll be opportunities for those who can stay to go into networking sessions. All of this is facilitated via the web portal that you are already on. So now over to Will Norman. Will Norman is London's Cycling and Walking Commissioner. He's been in that role since 2016 and has had to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune and all kinds of brickbats and attacks and difficulties, but always does so with good grace and good humor, and has considerable success under his belt to boast about. So we're really pleased that you're with us here today. Will, over to you.
Thanks, Ashok. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thanks to LCC for organising it, but particular thanks to Netherlands Embassy. I was over in the Netherlands visiting with the Dutch Cycling Embassy, visiting some of the cities, looking at the infrastructure, looking at the changes that have happened there. And I'd recommend, if anyone's interested in seeing how it's done, talk to the Dutch Cycling Embassy and go over and have a look. So as Ashok said, I've been in role for 4 years or so, and on paper it's a simple job. It's how do we get Londoners walking and cycling more? And that is central to the city's transport strategy. But over the last 6 months or so, I've also overseen London's work to repurpose our transport network while we battle coronavirus, in London. And I'm just trying to figure out how I move these slides on. So it feels like a very long time ago. This is March this year, first lockdown. Londoners were only able to leave our homes to do some exercise, to buy food. And for all those people who were able to get out and about during lockdown, I think one of the silver linings was just suddenly there was no traffic on our streets. This is directly behind Downing Street. And for anyone who normally knows it, it's clogged up with motor traffic. Without it, it's suddenly a very nice place for families to ride their bikes. And I think that it reinforced that, the key thing that is stopping more people cycling within London is that there is just too much traffic. That traffic went away. There was safe space for people to cycle and people started doing it. We had a glimpse of what our healthy streets approach was setting out to, had been working towards. When we looked at public transport, suddenly, you know, this was in the height of the lockdown, and Ashok touched on this, that with the impact of social distancing, suddenly the capacity of our public transport network was really limited. This red line going across the graph is what 100% of our services, so all the tube and all the trains working, would carry the number of people it would carry with 2 meters social distancing. And you can see what a normal load is like and normal numbers are like with those blue graphs. So if a fraction of those journeys that were being made by public transport shifted to the to roads, we know our roads would have clogged up with traffic, congestion, road danger, and we would have, you know, had an air quality crisis, an air pollution crisis in the middle of a respiratory disease pandemic. So one of the key things that we wanted to do was move away from that and shift journeys fast to walking and to cycling. Our street space program was the solution to this. We quickly developed an approach to repurpose those streets, and it focused on 3 areas. The first one was looking at space for people in towns and centres. Those of you who know London will know this is Brixton. Here it's a strategic road, it's a big bus tube interchange, it's got a market, pubs, concert venues, and there just isn't enough space to socially distance on the pavement while to wait for a bus. So what we did was take space from the roads and widen that, giving space to the to people to use. It wasn't just in Brixton where this happened. This is in Hackney, where smaller high street, this is Broadway Market, where the council very quickly moved to close the high street to give more space to social distancing. This is what it looked like on a normal day prior to COVID. And this is what it looks like the other day, with no traffic, no parked cars, plenty of space for social distancing, children cycling up and down it. Businesses can still, you know, people can still get access to their businesses for freight. But this is a pattern that's happening all over London. This is in Bermondsey Street in Southwark. 2 blocks of concrete and a bit of plastic totally transformed this high street, to the point where now I'm getting complaints from some of the cab drivers that it's too full of people, which is exactly what we do need. Again, this is the Cut near TfL's headquarters, a street that, my goodness, was calling out for a change. Finally has been restricted for traffic, and we widened some pavements down there too. In the heart of the city, this is Bishopsgate, where we changed the priority on the streets to make it bus, bike and pedestrians only. A scheme that at the moment we're fighting in the High Court. I think today my team are there fighting for this after judicial reviews were lodged against it. But again, shown to be hugely successful and very busy. The second piece of the street space program was looking at focusing on strategic cycle routes. We had been building that network, as Ashok had said, for some time, but there was the need to rapidly roll out those protected spaces using temporary materials, accelerating that existing program, but looking at new routes as well, where, for example, to help reduce crowding on the public transport network. The first of this was Park Lane. People are usually familiar with it. It is a 4-lane motorway, 40 miles an hour space. It is a particularly unpleasant space for cycling. It is now 20 miles an hour and has protected cycle lanes along it. Ashok touched on this. For the first generation of superhighways would just paint, providing very little protection. That has had an upgrade and is being well used. And you can see by the types of people who are cycling here, kids wouldn't, not in a million years would I let my kids cycle along here before. They are now, and they can do. This is Chiswick High Road, a scheme that I've certainly been working at for a long time. I've been called every name under the sun and had all sorts of nasty comparisons made to me. But we very quickly moved in, put in temporary materials with a bi-directional track going down this road. And since we've started, over 90 kilometers of new bike lanes have emerged since May, which is a massive credit. This is Chiswick before. If you, you would have to be pretty confident moving it out of vehicles to cycle down there before. So this map shows a bit of the scale of what we've delivered. This is the strategic cycling analysis, our sort of master plan of how we prioritize where we think we could invest to get more people, enable more people to cycling. And as Ashok said, we've seen a huge increase. I think at the beginning of COVID, we had reached about 20% of the network that we wanted to deliver. That has leapt up by from 260 kilometers to over 380 kilometers of network. Up to 28% of that network is now covered, and I think 23 new town centres are now connected as part of that network. So it's not just about the long routes, it's collecting the town centres to make those local journeys much more appealing to be used by more sustainable transports. And the evidence shows that this is changing behaviour. 17% of Londoners are choosing to walk and cycle more. We're seeing in inner London that's up to 22%. Despite there being far fewer journeys being made across London because people are working at home, cycling on average is up by a fifth. It's up 20% on the weekdays. On weekends, it's up. It's almost double. Well, it's doubled. And in fact, in some places, it's tripled. So we are seeing this massive increase, and that is and I think what's most significant is not the absolute numbers, but the mode shift. With fewer journeys being made, we are seeing more people using this, using our infrastructure and making it safe. But it's not just all about bike lanes. It's also about the focus we've placed on residential streets and low traffic neighbourhoods. As I said, one of the silver linings in lockdown was seeing people use our streets in a different way. Families, people running to the local park, people playing out on the street, people walking, people cycling, and this is one of the low traffic neighbourhoods in London. Waltham Forest have picked up the baton on this over the last 5 years. And again, it's very cheap. It's installing a planter and some nice paving. But as I said to my colleagues, you can't build a railway on the cheap, but you can certainly build a low traffic neighbourhood on the cheap. This is Lambeth. We've seen an explosion of LTNs over the city. In the past 5 months, it's got up to about 100 schemes across London now in March. Lambeth have been doing a wonderful job in terms of the way that they've been explaining this and engaging people in that borough. We've also seen an explosion in school streets, and I'm particularly pleased about this. One of my fears for social distancing when my kids go to school, and you see the crowded space around the school gates, and creating that space for people to be able to socially distance, but also enable them kids to make some of their first journeys themselves, those independent journeys by sustainable modes, sets that behaviour for life. I think this is the sort of the foundations for the future of London, are those kids who are cycling to primary and secondary school now, and that behaviour will stick with them. We now have over 300 school streets across London and more coming all the way. This is in Haringey, where parents started volunteering to help do this until the ANPR cameras, the automatic cameras, come in. But, as usual, I'm not going to lie and say it's plain sailing. I think Jeanette Sadiq-Khan said, when you push the status quo pushes back. And as I said, we've got ongoing court cases about some of the changes. People have had threats of violence, all sorts of things going on, and people have just been disobeying some of the stuff. Some people really, really don't like these changes, and we've had cameras, planters being vandalized. However, we know from previous experience, but also other polling, that there's a lot of noise from vocal minorities. But with a bit of time, these schemes bed in. We need to give them time to bed in. At the speed in which we've been delivering them, not everything is perfect. Some of them need tweaking, changing, modifying. That's the approach that we have to take, not withdrawing them. So what's next? We've had this astonishing 4 or 5 months, and I think we've got still, as Ashok said, we've got a long, hard road ahead of us. Social distancing, I think from a COVID perspective, is going to be here for some time, and the nervousness around use of public transport is going to continue, I foresee, for some time. And so we are continuing to invest and deliver alternatives for people so that they can get around safely, and making London a more livable city. We've secured another £95 million over the next 6 months from the government as part of the funding arrangements, and that's coming through there. We're working with councils, providing lit money so that they can start up some of their schemes. for me, what we need to be doing is continuing to deliver some of the temporary schemes, but not everything can be done in temporary materials. There are some junctions and other parts of the city that won't be able, you can't do with wands and planters in whatever mode, however much we want to. They will need permanent changes. So I'm keen to get back into some of the permanent schemes that we've been working and using a concept that I'm calling temporary plus, which is learning and taking some of the great stuff that's been delivered recently, but adding in some of the permanent measures that will allow these schemes to be delivered where we can't just use that. So we've got a slew of new street space projects, more low traffic neighborhoods, more cycle routes coming up. But we're also seeing, and I use this tweet in particular because we're seeing more support for change coming out of these new areas. This is a low traffic neighborhood being funded. This is news that a low traffic neighborhood will be funded by a hospital trust, a charity associated with the hospital trust, because of its benefits for public health. And this is a really significant change. This is the first time a third party has come in saying this is good. And it's not just any old third party. This is a health trust recognizing the health benefits. So, you know, we are seeing a change. While there is still vocal noise and challenge, we are seeing a change. But I want to finish by, you know, I've always said the recipe for success, or that I see, there are three things that are there are a lot of things that are critical, but there are three things that are really critical. You need the political leadership and the funding. You need the technical expertise from all the people, both at TfL, but also critically within the boroughs. And I'd like to thank all of them, because none of this would have been possible, not just the TfL staff, but the borough staff, the consultants, everybody who's worked on this from an engineering perspective and from a delivery perspective. But the third pillar, which all of these changes are based on, is support and campaigners within the community. And I want to give a huge thank you to LCC members, other people, Mums for Lungs, Living Streets, Strands. There've been a raft of people who've come forward on this. I use this picture intentionally. This is a picture. Usually the signs, road signs aren't the most exciting things in the world, but this one is for me. It wasn't worked up in Whitehall. It wasn't designed by the DFT. It was designed by one of the new campaigners, Sarah Berry, who's helping, and I think it's one of the most effective ways of communicating the benefits of a low traffic neighborhood, and does it 1,000 times better than the normal road closed sign. You know, the road is open to people walking, to cycle, people with disabilities, and people on scooters. So, you know, I want to say a huge thank you to the campaigners who played such an important role in this, but also saying that because people have seen what their streets might well be like, I feel that we've got a new generation of campaigners who are engaged in this, and that gives me massive confidence for the future.
Super stuff. Thank you so much, Will. And you're absolutely right. I mean, right at the apex of the conditions that are needed to affect the kind of changes that we want to see is political will. But that political will has to be supported by people on the ground, advancing the cause, having discussions with their neighbors, going out into the community, helping win hearts and minds. I think everybody on this call who has you know, been on a doorstep and maybe had a tough experience, but rides through it and helps win people over, I think they'd really appreciate the encouragement you've just given. Thank you so much. Now, we have time for questions, I think about 10 minutes. I'm not yet getting questions through in my chat feed, so whoever's having the questions from the tech side, could you just double check they're coming through from the portal? But that's fine, because there was plenty of things in your presentation, Will, that I think do bear some explanation or further comments. So I'm going to start on a few questions that I've had. One thing that's been remarkable is the run rate over the past 6 months. You know, it took the last 2 years of Boris Johnson's mayoralty to put in the flagship superhighways that we saw in the middle of town, and then Sadiq Khan tripled the amount of protected space in the early parts of his the 4 years of his original 4 years of his mayoralty. Yet in the last 6-9 months, you've taken that up to 5 times the level, I think, that compared to the beginning of Sadiq Khan's term, and that's largely been through temporary infrastructure. Is this telling us something about how we can use temporary infrastructure to build the network faster? I'm not saying that, you know, we need the temporary infrastructure in permanently, but is this telling us something about how we can achieve a faster rollout of the network?
Yeah, I think it is, Ashok, and I think, you know, one of the things that I've been really keen on, and what can we learn from this exceptional period? You know, we couldn't one of the reasons why we were able to deliver all this stuff so fast in this emergency was the amount of work that's happened before, the work that we'd already been doing, not just me, us at TfL doing, but everybody had been working on either campaigns or had a delivery within the boroughs. So there is that expertise and knowledge within London, both from a grassroots perspective, from a political perspective, and from an officer and technical perspective, which allowed this to happen quickly. And you can see elsewhere in the country where they've got the same desire, but maybe hasn't been delivered. And I think that is down to the track record we've had. I think another thing is that we've all been working on pipelines of new projects for a long time. So while we changed what was being delivered and how, some of those routes were there. But for me, I think what we need to do is learn from how we've done things with temporary materials, how we can build that into a future program, future stuff. I don't want everything to be temporary materials. You know, temporary materials are quick to put in, but I worry that they're quick to pull out too. So and sometimes the benefits are, you can't realize all the benefits through temporary materials. So just doing everything in temporary materials is clearly not the way. But surely, for example, can we do more of the links in temporary materials quickly, tackle the junctions, which we know take a bit more time and sometimes need more permanent materials, and then later come back and gradually do the links, so we get a safer network faster. And I think that's part of the work that we need to do carrying going forward. But it's not just the temporary infrastructure. A lot of this was done through temporary legislation, emergency measures, which so we haven't actually consulted on a lot of this. I think we also need to relook at how we consult and how we engage communities, so that allows us to move quickly, while also taking on board that feedback, that engagement, and giving people notice. You know, the reason why we do that consultation is to come up with better schemes, and we always do. We haven't ever consulted on something that hasn't changed slightly because of the feedback on that. And so, you know, but can we do that faster? Can we do that differently? I think we can, and that's the challenge I'm posing to teams at the moment.
Very good, very good. Could I just pick up on something that you said, and the questions are coming through on this subject, around the low traffic neighborhoods. Now, you mentioned how sometimes it's very difficult to win the case at the local level. What, a twin question, what have you learned so far that will enable us to have a smoother pathway, if we can, towards seeing more low traffic neighborhoods being created in future in London? And are you concerned that at the moment we're experiencing a bit of what people call a culture war, where the low traffic neighborhoods are seen as or treated as a lightning rod for all sorts of discontent and concerns? Some of us would say are way out of proportion to the actual impact of the low traffic neighborhoods themselves, recognizing there's always going to be some impact in the interim. And how do we get around that?
Yeah, so in terms of what we've learned so far for a smoother path, I think there are a number of things I've certainly learned. Is one, we do need to do engagement, you know, and we do need to talk people through. A lot of the initial response in some low traffic neighborhoods were just surprised at what had happened, and things have been dropped on people's doorstep, that side of things. We are working exceptionally closely with the emergency services and making sure that we've now got a new system of updating every road change that goes into sat-nav systems to allow the emergency services to work through, both in terms of a design and piece. But we also need to do some things up, you know, the coordination between stuff that's happening on main roads and low traffic neighborhoods need to happen in a better way. I think that for all of us, we need to be careful. We're not biting off more than we can chew in terms of the size and the scale of some of those low traffic neighborhoods. You know, if an area hasn't had any low traffic neighborhood at all, and suddenly it's a huge change, you know, that can be a real challenge for people to understand the things. But I also think that as we deliver more of these, we've got the stories of success. We're building up the evidence. We're showing the benefits that these bring to people. And a bit like controlled parking zones, when someone suddenly has a controlled parking zone, the next street wants one, the next street wants one. And we're seeing some of that. I'm getting requests for low traffic neighborhoods in neighboring areas, not because people don't want them. They think, actually, that's great, but I want one. So I think that is part of the piece. The culture war piece, I think, is concerning. I think that, as you said, this is a lightning rod for a lot of other issues, and I think COVID has accelerated and exposed, you know, both potential in active travel, but it also accelerates and exposes a lot of other inequalities and other issues in society in a time of crisis. So that is a challenge, and I think, how do we, you know, but we've got to reflect back on the data and the evidence. And if we look at the polling, when we've done polls, the majority of people living in a low traffic neighborhood want them and can see the benefits of it. And so, you know, we just need to keep working on this. And you know, it does help that this is one of the few areas where the mayor and the prime minister are on the same page. You know, it's not often I can say that, but this is something where, you know, I'm regularly in number 10 talking about this, as well as being in City Hall talking about this, because it's a shared agenda, both from the decarbonisation side of things as well as the transport side.
That's really encouraging, that last point, Will, because what we have all worked so hard to do over the years is to try and build a positive cross-party consensus around the self-evident good sense of moving towards a city that's based on bicycling and other forms of mobility. So it's really good to hear about that joined up working between number 10 and City Hall. I'm getting a number of questions on e-scooters, actually, more than I imagined, but I suppose it's no surprise ultimately. So from where we sit as the London Cycling Campaign, we think there is potentially a really important role for e-scooters properly regulated to help decarbonise our roads and affect mass mode shift away from private motor car use. And there is a commonality of interest, you know, again, properly regulated. I can imagine seeing e-scooters speed limited, weight limited, acceleration limited in cycling infrastructure, for example, and encouraged in low traffic neighbourhoods. But people have a lot of worries and concerns about safety. And some people are also concerned that they're just going to drag people off public transport or indeed drag people off bicycles. What's your view on the emerging e-scooter market? And we have a trial in London next year as well, don't we?
We do. We just announced that we've gone out to procurement for a trial as part of the DfT's approach for trialing rental e-scooters. I do want to say that at the moment, privately owned e-scooters remain illegal on the public road. So just be careful of that. And I don't think there's enough awareness of that. But I think, you know, I agree with you. I think that e-scooters will have some potential in terms of the makeup of transport in the city. I have some worries about things as they currently stand, and I think you hit the nail on the head when you talked about properly regulated. At the moment, this isn't regulated in any way. Some of the machines you can buy, you know, it can do 50 miles an hour. You know, that's clearly not safe for that type of vehicle to be able to do those sort of speeds. So I have concerns around the speed limits. I have concerns around the make of the materials, the size of the wheels, the brakes, whether they've got lights. All of that sort of thing is one piece that we need to hammer out. The second piece is, where can they go? Now, I think if they are properly regulated and manage the speeds and that sort of things, then protected cycle infrastructure is probably a good place for them to go. Similarly, the low traffic neighborhoods, that should be if that's safe and it's clear, then that could be potentially, you know, low traffic area is a good place. What I don't want them is on the pavements where they could cause injury or create fear, particularly among other vulnerable pedestrians, people with visual impairments and those sort of things. So the second piece is, where do they go? The third piece that I'm concerned about is the power for cities to be able to regulate this themselves. We saw through dockless bikes, which, you know, I'm a fan of dockless bikes, but the way that they were rolled out and the inability of people to be able to control that caused a massive kickback. And I don't want e-scooters to have the same stuff of that same problem. So where are they parked? You know, how many should there be? We've seen in Paris, in other US cities, other European cities, when they come out and they're mass rolled out, 20,000 show up in Paris over a place of weeks. You know, people were tripping over them, they were becoming a hazard. This is not what we want. And I think that's completely counterproductive for the thing. So I think they will have a role. I don't think they're the solution. I think they're still not as environmentally friendly as a bike or an e-bike, both in terms of the process by which they're made, X, Y, and Z. They aren't. I'm not sure how active their travel is compared with e-bikes, bikes, or walking, because you're not doing that activity. But I think in any respect, in all of those respects, they're better than a private car. And so if it's getting people out of those journeys and doing that, then I think they have a role to play in the city.
Yeah, I think we agree with you, Will, and thank you so much for your answer. It's going to be really interesting to see how the trial rolls out.
So, and just, Ashok, can I just say one thing about the trial? that for me, the trial, this
please.
is an opportunity. I want to know, e-scooters aren't going to go away. We need to use the scooter, the trial of the scooters, to figure out how do we make these as safe and as beneficial for the city as possible. And then only by trying things can we do that. Yeah. And so that's the purpose of that trial.
Very true. Now we are 4 minutes over time, and we need to move people or invite people to go into their workshops, and you've got to get away. But I'm going to beg everybody's indulgence by asking you one more question, Will. We have spent a long time rightly holding up the example of the Dutch approach to facilitating active travel and cycling in particular. At some point, somebody's going to run a wherever, I don't know, Love Cape Town, Go London campaign, because they'll have learned from everything that we've done in London, because we've become world leaders in innovation when it comes to active travel and cycling. What are you most proud of? What do you think we have done differently and applied all our creative juices to achieve in London?
I'm proud of an enormous amount that's happened in the last 4 years, but I think the piece that I am most proud about, because of that global reach, is the work we've been doing on heavy goods vehicles, which often goes under the radar. Heavy goods vehicles cause the most fatalities among cyclists and pedestrians. Our direct vision standard doesn't just make the trucks coming into London safer. Because we work with the European Union, they've added those requirements for people basically to design out those blind spots out of heavy goods vehicles into the design of future vehicles. That will mean that all vehicles built in Europe for the European supply chain will design out those devastatingly dangerous flaws. Yeah. That is something that will change or save the lives of thousands of people in coming years. And that is down to the work that's happened in London. You're campaigning, other people's campaigning for that change. And for us, not just thinking of this as a London issue, but as how do we use the London innovation to drive systemic change? And that's something I think that we often don't talk about, but it's something I'm particularly proud of in the last few years.
That is a fantastic example, and when we get the most dangerous lorries off our streets, that'll make an enormous difference to the level of cycling so the safety for cycling and walking on any street, whether it's got cycling infrastructure or not. Really good stuff. Okay, you've got to go, Will. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ashok, and I hope the rest of the conference goes well.
Thank you so much. Okay, ladies and gentlemen. We are 6 minutes behind schedule, but the next session, the workshops are due to start at 20 to 3. So we've got a few minutes to go into your workshops. I'll leave it to the agenda managers to decide precisely what time they'll start. And you've got a little video to watch while you're waiting for your workshop to actually start. You can select your workshop from the portal. And so it's time to move there now. So I hope you have a productive time this afternoon, and we'll catch up again later on when we come back after the workshops are finished for a wrap-up session. Bye-bye for now.